So there was some horrific gun violence in Chicago last week. 13 people were shot and wounded, including a 3-year-old boy. And it's really remarkable, and I want to sort of talk about this for our listeners who don't live in the United States, because I'm not sure everybody's aware of this.
Right.
But when there's a mass shooting, as there so often is in the United States, it really depends on where it happens and who it happens to. So if it happens, say, at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., it's a big deal because...
The Navy,
Washington, D.C., powerful people, white people. So it really depends on who the victims are. Not to say, all the victims were powerful white people, but it happened in a place where the media pays a lot of attention to anyway.
If you are within 2 blocks of where a senator buys his cigars, it's going to get covered.
Right. A bunch of little white kids get shot. It's obviously horrific because it's children who are killed. But also it happened in a community where we don't expect gun violence. If it happens in Chicago, there's not a lot of media attention, generally speaking.
It's sort of they have it coming. Like, that's what you get for being black in Chicago.
Yeah, and so I'm going to link to the CBS article on it, and I'm not encouraging you to read the comment section because it's horrific, but I'll recap it for you. Basically, what the sentiment appears to be are people saying these are gangbangers, and basically they should be executed. And also, the victims are, what do you expect? You live in Southside Chicago. That is where a lot of violence is happening. This is just what we expect from Chicago. And it's really remarkable because Chicago, especially Southside Chicago, is a fucking war zone.
Yeah.
Like, how the president declares areas natural disaster areas after, like, tornadoes hit or something?
Yeah.
I think Chicago should be declared a disaster area for the gun violence.
It's really bad, and we're not going to do anything about it, especially when people are talking like this. You guys, Desi is on my lap. I'm taking a picture. I've taken a picture.
Okay. But not only that, like, what you just said, Jamie, that seems to be the general attitude on the right and the left right now, and it's really scary, where people are like, nothing's going to happen. Mm-mm. It doesn't matter how many people are killed in a mass shooting. It doesn't matter how many times, because Chicago, this has been going on for years and years. Terrible, terrible gun violence.
Yeah.
It's never going to be enough bodies to make Washington on its own do anything because the NRA is still so powerful.
And it's so sad, too, because, and again, this only happens in poor communities or communities of color, where it's like that acceptance Allie was talking about. It's not just with gun violence, but it's like people almost like respond with such disdain, where you're like, you talk about a shooting and they go, yeah, it's outside Chicago. Or you talk about like Detroit, being bankrupt. And it's like, yeah, it's Detroit. Or, yeah, that's fucking, whatever. And it's just like, no one's going to, like, why aren't we talking about doing something? Why are we just, like, slowly crossing off cities on our to-do list instead of fucking saving them?
Yeah, and that's not to... I don't want to give the false impression that there's no organizing and there's no legislation being proposed and, like, voted on, like, as we speak, because there are, Democratic officials who are trying to get legislation passed. There are amazing grassroots activists who are really trying to keep the pressure. I'm talking more about, like, the general public attitude. Like, after Newtown, there really was a sense like, okay, we really have to do something. Like, now is the time to get really serious, But anytime, like, after even the Navy Yard shooting in D.C., didn't really hear a lot of people saying, when are we going to do something about this?
No.
Chicago, there's never that kind of talk.
No.
Outside of the communities who are immediately affected by it, like, the people in Southside Chicago are like, we have to do something now,
It's Jesus Christ. I'm like, besides the school shootings, it's like you had a fucking congresswoman who was shot in the fucking face. You know what I mean? Like, what else do you need? I feel like when there are school shootings, people at least, like, feign. There's at least posturing in Washington, because,
right.
like, I mean, Newtown was just, like, so fucking horrific. But it's like, yeah, man, turns out that when guns are used for gun-stated purpose, people fucking die.